So I'm back working on the engine and gearbox. So the engine is more or less finished. There's probably a few little enhancements that I can do while it's in the car, but I'll talk about the main ones that the main one that I've done. So I'm not sure whether you can see it, but this here is my version of the advanced retard mechanism. Let me get this engine in a position where you can see, and as you can see, that basically goes up and down, moves a little shaft that sits underneath the distributor, and that's the advanced retard mechanism. On the bottom end, I've just left it. It isn't connected to anything. It's all buried away behind the steering box anyway, so I've just left it at that. But there you can see it sitting on the top of the vehicle. Job done. The second thing I've done, you'll notice, is I've added the distributor. So the distributor now is in position. You may remember I made all these little spark plugs, which you can see down there. I've also made a small bit of plastic to simulate the suppressor caps that are common on most cars these days. And I've put all of the ignition wiring in an order that is typical of a straight 8 engine. And then, as was quite common in the past, I've just bound these together with a simple electrical loom. That just helped to stop these things bouncing around as cars went round corners and whatnot. And in fact, in later cars, and I've often seen on cars, there would be a tube here, which is rigidly fixed to the engine, and which these cables run down and pop out, which was a method of just tidying them up and stopping them flying around as you flew around corners. So that's pretty much the the engine complete. So I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm going to finish off the gearbox next. So where am I on the gearbox? So here's the two halves of the gearbox. Pretty much standard components. You may recall that I made my own pedals. So here indeed are a pair of pedals. You may remember that this is what the kit provided as the basis of a pedal. As you can see, mine are much more substantial and meaty. Oops, just drop that. I'll pick that other one up. And as you can see, they pretty much reflect what this and its other component would have achieved. So that's two of the pedals mounted. This is the third pedal. I've changed this slightly because I've actually made this a threaded component so that I can lock it up when it's on the shaft, because it does actually move and has connecting links. This is the brake pedal. And then I've been busy painting all the various bits and pieces. There are as well a number of little links that come out the gearbox. I've chosen to replace those. So this is one of my links. This end is threaded to go onto the threaded shaft, and then can be locked into position using a nut, and the other end is going into one of the many U connectors that are used throughout the car. So there's 4 of those. And then I've just got various other bits and pieces that have just been through paint. So the next task I'm going to do is to assemble the gearbox and eventually mount that onto the engine. So watch this space. Oh, just in passing, I've assembled the radiator. This is the stock parts. I've simply bolted and glued them together. As you can see, I've made a brass outer. I've painted the outer unit of the radiator brass. It's quite common for radiators to be made to brass at this time, with a core that's black. And again, the core would have been black in many cars, and I've worked on many cars where actually there is a brass radiator outer with a black inner core. So that's just in passing. The other thing I'd say in passing is I started looking at the little bonnet catches, and I'm playing with that at the moment in the workshop. I'll come back later. I think that little project in itself is going to be worthy of its own video. So I did mention it in the introduction, but I'll come back to that, and there will be a separate video in the future. Well, this didn't turn out to be quite as easy as I thought it was going to be. I assembled a gearbox and I was just putting the handbrake, which I've missed, oh here it is, which goes onto there. And as I was screwing in the screw, it snapped, leaving the end of the screw stuck in that little hole. Fortunately, I've got a machine shop, so I was able to make this punch piece, and then I simply put that on there, held that in a vise, and was able to punch the broken screw out. And just to show you what I was working with, so there, for example, there is the screw that I was the screw of the correct size I put in, and the one that broke. Never mind, I've sorted that problem out now, and I'm going to arrange to fix it in a different way. Another minor irritation with this gearbox is this component which goes through the gearbox. The screw that's recommended to fit it, in fact, just slides up and down in the hole. So what I've done is I've taken this 10BA bolt, and I've threaded the inside of that tube so that this just screws into it, and then I'll use that to fix this onto the vehicle. So I finished the assembly of the gearbox. As you can see, what I did here is I used a nut and bolt to hold the handbrake in position, having had the bolt snap there. I put all my modified operating arms on, so they're a little bit thicker than the ones that are provided with the kit originally, and in my opinion look better. I've got this adjusted now so that, as you can see, it's all moving as the brake moves. I've tested this against the floor to make sure that these fit roughly where the floor is, and the next thing to do is to put the small piece on there that's missing, put the ring round which holds it together, and then affix this to the engine. One other little thing I've got to do that is another little filling hole, which I'll make an adapter for with a square head, typical of what you find on oil filling stations. And you can see at the bottom there is that little brass 10BA nut. I had to shave the head down a little bit so that I didn't end up with this piece hitting it. So you can see there it is clear. So that's the gearbox ready for the next stage, which is attachment to the engine. So as you can see, I've been busy putting the engine into the chassis, and that's now done. The other thing I've done is I've fitted the rear suspension, an axle onto the car, which you can see at the back there. Just a comment really, is that something that I found. I was going to zoom in, but you can see these brass components here. These are actually spacers that I made, because these little components in the kit that go through there are actually too long. And what it meant was that if you look at the springs, they're more or less aligned. They were being pushed over, and they were as much as 5mm out. So what I've done is I've machined these back so they're 5mm shorter than they would, and then compensated by putting this little brass filling, this brass bush on the other side, so I don't have to try and thread the rods, and I haven't got I can't find my 2mm thread. I think a thread cutter. I think I've got one, but I don't know where it is. But anyway, so that's the engine mounted in the car. Chassis, you can see from this bit here, is yet to be resolved. That's loose, so I'll get that sorted out a little bit later. What I'm about to do is put the front axle on the car, so I'll get back to you when I've done that. And here is the chassis with the front axle now connected. So just one outstanding item, and that is I've got to fix the friction dampers to the front of the car. That's very similar to these that you can see at the back there. 2 of those to be fitted, and that's the task I'm going to get on with next.